most people are not in their zone of genius all the time, but could we shift things? So I call it job crafting. Is there an opportunity to craft our job so that we're in our zone of genius? Because if we can get in our zone of genius more often, we're going to be happier, healthier, more productive.
Welcome to the Seismic Shift podcast, where we explore the seismic shifts that are affecting how we live and how we work. And I am so excited. Get ready for our guest today. We've got Bart Foster's in the house. Let me tell you, Bart Foster is one special human. And I truly, truly mean that. I happened to be on a podcast, a YPO podcast, Young Presidents Organization, probably 2 years ago, maybe. And I was talking about connection. And the next thing I knew, I had a LinkedIn message from a Bart Foster who said, we really should set up a Zoom. We speak the same language. So we did. We realized we were completely in alignment with our mission, our values, what impact we're trying to make in the world. And since then, we've been partnering on leadership retreats. We've gone on connection walks. Bart is the CEO and founder of a company called Business Outside. He's the author of this beautiful book that everyone should buy called Business Outside. And he is disrupting how we think, how we meet, and how we create. Welcome, Bart Foster.
Thank you. Michelle, it's always fun to talk with you. You have so much energy you're bringing to the world. It's great.
I feel the same way about you, Bart. So let's get down to it. I introduced you of how I know you, but please do tell our listeners the story of you, how in the world you got to the place where you were in Boulder and started a company called Business Outside.
Let's see. I was a big company guy for a number of years. I was with Kellogg's and Novartis. I created a company inside Novartis that I spun out called Solo Health. And we put those health kiosks you may have seen like in Walmart or Publix or Safeway, something like that, that screen your blood pressure and body mass index. And anyway, that was a kind of a light bulb moment. It started in vision and it ended up becoming a health and wellness station, and we scaled. We went to about 4,000 locations, raised $50 million in capital. And one day my chairman asked me to go to breakfast, and he said, how big do you want this company to get? And I shared with him a number, and he said, Bart, every once in a while, I see a company that has all the makings of going public. And this is one of those times. And he said, we'll have to make a few changes. And I said, oh yeah, well, we'll need a new, and I started naming some things we need to do. And he said, I wasn't really picking up what he was laying down. And he said, Bart, I would even be CEO for a while. And that was the moment that I realized I was getting forced out of the company I founded. And at the time, right, this was my baby, and I was CEO for 7 years, and I kind of birthed this. And from that day, I had this moment of like, okay, if I'm not the CEO, who am I? And I was embarrassed and angry and upset and confused and lost. And that put me on a whole new path. And what I write about in the book and how I got to Boulder and everything, it's discover your path forward. And I was in a YPO forum, and they helped me realize you're still the same guy. Go do something else. And a cool part of the story, though, is I ended up going to a meeting. There was a life coach. My wife was in the room with me, and we walk in the room, and on the slide, it said, how many spring breaks and summers do you have left before your oldest goes to college? And we looked at each other, holy cow, this is like 8 years, 8 spring breaks, 8 summers. And that kind of lit a fire. And there was another resource at the same event. And this guy, Jim Sharp, he teaches on how to find a business to buy. He teaches at Harvard Business School with his wife. And the one thing I took away was, because I thought, maybe I'll buy a business. But the one thing I took away was, he called it the zip code strategy. And he said, there's businesses all over the world, different sizes, geography, different cultures. He said, pick where you want to live first. And he called it the zip code strategy. And that night, my wife and I sat in bed, and she's like, we don't have any ties to Atlanta. We could live anywhere. And she started Googling best places to raise a family and healthiest cities. And I was like, well, shoot, I'm going to Google my own list. And I Googled best cities for entrepreneurs and outdoor lifestyle. All these things. Anyway, Boulder was on every list. we came out, fell in love with it, and we went back to Atlanta, sold half our stuff, moved out. That was 10 years ago. We didn't know anyone, didn't know anybody here. But I started to have to make connections, which I'm sure we'll get to. And I did a little bit differently.
Oh my gosh, that story is powerful. You know what? Part of that story I was unaware of. I knew that you started the company. I knew it was going big. It had so much potential. I did not know that you had been the CEO for 7 years.
Yeah.
So no wonder your identity was so tied up in that. I knew it was your baby, and I knew that conversation was really tough when he said, I don't see you as CEO, and how shocking over breakfast that must have been. Thank you for sharing your story. And then thank you for sharing with Allie, your wife, of just, painting us the picture. You're in the room like, okay, we can do something even better, different. Next chapter, let's be intentional. So you get out to Boulder and you start business outside.
No,
talk to her. No,
I didn't know what I was going to do. I was lost. I didn't have a job. Like, I started a little consulting firm. I ran a company called Gaiam for a little bit. But I'll tell you, and this relates to the connections, and this is kind of the genesis of business outside, but I would reach out to people to network. And I did what I knew how to do for 20 years. I was a really good networker, and I would ask people to coffee and lunch and, hey, can I pick your brain? And all these things that, you learn how to do. And this one woman, she's a venture capitalist. Her name's Elizabeth Krause. And Elizabeth said, I don't do coffee or lunch. She said, meet me at the trailhead. We're going to go for a walk. And I remember coming home and telling Allie, like, this is so weird. I'm going on this hiking meeting. I don't know what to wear. And then you find out, like, it doesn't matter. Everybody, this is kind of what you do. But in Atlanta, you show up your sport coat and you have lunch, and it's like, it's just this like, transactional exchange. Something special happened that day because I was more authentic. I was more vulnerable. I just felt more alive. And we're walking shoulder to shoulder. And she said, well, what are you working on? And I said, well, what I used to do. And I kind of went into this because that was my identity. And she's like, no. Like, what are you working on now? And why are you doing what you, and I told her, like, I got forced out of the company I founded. And I thought for sure she'd stop in the trail and go, oh my God. And she was like, oh yeah, it happens all the time. We just kept walking. And it just, I don't know, it validated that I'm going to be fine. But I got home and I told Allie, like, I have so much energy. I'm so alive. I want to start doing this. And because I was an entrepreneur, because I raised a lot of capital, people would reach out. Hey, can I pick your brain? Can I have coffee and lunch? I started doing what Elizabeth did. And I said, hey, just meet me in my house. We'll go for a walk. And I happened to back it. You've done it. We've done it together. I happened to back up to the mountain. And that was sort of the start of what became Business Outside.
That's the story I remember in your book of you taking a walk and just feeling so alive, so creative, and having this light bulb moment. I want to share this with the rest of the world. And that's when you created Business Outside. Okay. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing your story. So what do you think one of the seismic shifts in leadership right now in business? What would you say one of the greatest seismic shifts that's happening right now? What is it?
I think there's a number of them. I think one, and it's been accelerated by COVID, right? So all of a sudden, remote environment opens up all these different unique opportunities where I don't have to go to the office. Well, people are craving these connections, and they didn't know it. Like, they just assumed, oh, this is really cool. I get to hang out with my cat, and I can, wear my slippers, and everything's cool. But we're missing this connection. And what companies are starting to find, and now the research is supporting it, is people still have to get together and they're still going to meet. But now when they do, they want it to be powerful and have these meaningful connections. So I'll give you one of the trends, right? Before COVID, right, there's a lot of these, I'll call them boondoggles. I don't know if you know that word. You go on these corporate retreats, you stay in a nice hotel, but you're in a ballroom and you're going to these late night dinners and you're boozing it up at the bar, and they have cigar tastings and this whiskey shots and all this horse shit. And then you get up and you go to the buffet, right? There's a buffet breakfast, and usually on the meeting, it'll say on the agenda from 8 to 9, we're going to have breakfast. Well, what happens? Everybody shows up at 8:50. They get their bagel and they sit next to somebody they already know, or they just scroll on their phone, and then the meeting starts. it's a whole lost opportunity. People want to interact. They want to have genuine connection. It's not about boozing up at the bar. So there's a few big shifts. The way meetings are done are completely changing. It's not about the boondoggles. It's about meaningful connections. And it's about being intentional, being authentic, being vulnerable. So that's where we're just having a ton of success because all these companies are like, oh my God, we need what you have.
I totally agree. I mean, that's why I flew out to Boulder. I said, Bart, we're going on a connection walk. I love what you're doing. Count me in. I want to be a part of the movement. And I'm passionate about that. And at the same time, I'm alarmed by the statistics that I'm seeing saying that sitting is the new cigarette smoking, that sitting is so bad for us physically and now mentally and business wise. It causes cardiovascular disease, an increase in diabetes and strokes. So I feel like one of the biggest seismic shifts, I agree with you, I concur. One of the biggest seismic shifts right now in business is the way that we meet and the way that we conduct business. Because you're right, in the pandemic, and still there are, as you well know, clients who still say, oh gosh, my employees still want to work from home. And so I want to give them the flexibility. I love the flexibility. Absolutely. And I now know by the research, we need each other. And we need to be together. So say that you're going to say, well, you can, still work from home 2 days a week, but we're going to come together. So even when we come together, we need to meet differently. So just could you talk a little bit about, because I know you know the research on why sitting, if you're going to be still working from home, sitting on Zoom after Zoom after Zoom for 8 hours a day is bad for us.
I think that the science shows that when you're sedentary, it's not good. One of the facts I do know that, the average life expectancy of a truck driver is?
Oh, wow. I don't.
Take a guess.
Oh, wow. So if the average age for a male is in the 70s and for the women right. In the 80s, so I would say take at least 5 years off of that.
Close. Not even close, actually. It's 61. It's like 61 point something. And the reason, there's a number of reasons, but one is sedentary lifestyle, right? You're sitting all day, you're drinking Mountain Dews, and you're not sleeping as well, and you're not exercising. And it's bad. And you can translate that into being on a Zoom call, being at your chair. That's why, treadmill desks and stand-up desks and all these things, and get outside and everything else. So, but business outside is not just outside of nature, right? It's doing things different. It's meeting differently. It's being outside of your comfort zone. And anytime I find I'm outside of my comfort zone, it kind of slows down time. And if you think about it, every time you get outside your comfort zone, your zone just gets bigger. And I used to tell my kids, it's my job as a parent to get your circle as big as we can make it. Right now, they just laugh. Oh yeah, Dad, we're expanding our circle because they're 18 and 20. But I think it resonated. But yeah, we have to do things different.
We have. So sitting is very bad for us. And so we have to think differently and not just assume that we're supposed to be on Zoom meetings every single day, because that's not good for us. And number two, even if you're in the office, we can do things differently. People don't want to be in a conference room in your best suit having to deliver a PowerPoint presentation. So one of the things, as Bart just talked about, the stereotypical boondoggle, as he described it, kind of leadership meeting, that's out. What we're advocating is let's do things differently. So I flew to Austin probably about 6 months ago to be the keynote speaker on one of Bart's leadership retreats for a big group. I think it was a YPO group or a vision group. And instead, usually when speakers come in, they deliver a speech and they leave. And he said, no, Michelle, stay. I said, I would love to stay to see how you do things differently. So I arrived on a Sunday night. I don't think I left until maybe Wednesday or Tuesday. And everything that Bart did focused around meaningful connection. So rather than the dinner where there's a speaker or you don't really go deep getting to know each other, he did Jeffersonian dinners where we had specific structured questions. And let me tell you, no one talked about business. We all went deep and personal. And that was the first night. And then the very next morning we got up and we went on a connection walk. And then we heard from a speaker occasionally, but rarely were we sitting down just receiving information. And if there was a moment like that, then he facilitated a way for us to discuss and grow. So tell us how in the world you came up with that. I mean, you really disrupted the stereotypical boondoggle type of meeting. Talk to us about that because it works.
Thank you. I just created meetings and experiences that I wanted to be part of. And, being part of big companies, I would fly to these amazing destinations and you'd be inside and you'd be talked at for hours at a time. They'd give you a 10-minute break and you'd booze it up at the bar. And to me, some of the most valuable input was the 20-minute bus ride where you're sitting next to two other salespeople that also have the same struggles and challenges that you do. And they shared their ideas, thoughts, and best practices. It's like, why couldn't the whole meeting be that? So I just flipped the whole thing on its head. And it happened to kind of organically. The first time I did this innovation summit for the eye care industry, it's just where I had a lot of connections. And I invited 30 CEOs and we mixed them with 8 startups. And I wanted the startups to present their biggest challenge. And we got outside. And I didn't know it was a connection walk at the time. I called it a hike. And the first year I made it optional. And I think half the attendees came, but that became the best part of the meeting. So the next year I didn't make it optional. It's like, you have to go. And by the third year, there were so many people that wanted to come to this event that we had to limit attendance, and anybody that didn't go on the hike from the year before, they weren't invited back. And now it just becomes like, it was part of the thing. So a big part of what we do is called a connection hike or a connection walk. And, it's a facilitated walk and you're walking shoulder to shoulder. It's something just like when I met Elizabeth Krauss, something special happens because I say that motion creates emotion. And if you can get to the emotion and the feeling, that's where you get powerful connections and you get beyond the superficial.
Yeah. When I participated and did it with your group, you feel more authentic because you're not staring at somebody face to face, you're shoulder to shoulder. So you feel a little bit more like you can be honest and your real self. And also then when I did the connection walk with you and hiking the mountains in Boulder, I felt more creative and I had a lot of energy and I had a lot of creative energy. So I loved what you did. I love what you're doing with really disrupting the stereotypical leadership meeting. So there's that. And then let's talk about how we can, I want the listeners on this podcast after learning from you, Bart, to say, oh my gosh, I can do things differently. So I'm in New Orleans, Louisiana, and it's still 87 degrees here and it's very hot and people don't have trails in their backyards like they do in Boulder. So what would you tell, and obviously my audience is literally is a global audience. I'm not saying the New Orleanian, but what would you tell people who don't have trails in their backyard? How can we get people to do things differently when it comes to connection?
Asking better questions. So often we resort to just what we grew up with. It's, what do you do? How are you? I'm good. How are you doing? I'm good. Those are cool shoes. When did you fly in? When are you leaving? What hotel are you staying at? Nobody cares about any of that stuff. If we ask better questions, we'll get better answers. And if we can get better answers that lead to an emotion or feeling, and I'll give you an example. So, hey, what's something you celebrated or you're proud of in the last 6 months? What's giving you energy? What's zapping your energy? What are you most excited about that you saw at the show today? What's an innovation that you found really interesting over the last 6 months? What's an item under $100 that has brought you a lot of joy in the last year? Right. And all of a sudden you get to people talking and then, our mutual friend, Chris Tuff, he says it's a race to the middle and you want to find something that you have in common. Well, when you say, what do you do? Or when are you flying out? Who cares?
You are so true. So basically those surface questions are out. That's one of the seismic shifts. And that's one of the chapters in my book that I'm writing with Marshall Goldsmith. And it's the second in the Seismic Shift series. It's the seismic shift in you. And one of the chapters is you've got to ask great questions. Great leaders ask great questions. And we have gotten ourselves in this rut of, you're absolutely right, Bart. How are you? Great. Okay. Yeah. Come on. We got to go deeper. We got to go more personal. And so I love those questions. So you've already disrupted the way you're doing leadership meetings. Really, you're doing them from the inside out. Love that. And you're disrupting kind of the questions that we're asking. Okay. So what about how can people, and you're also asking us to think differently just about business in general. So say a bunch of our audience members are in a corporate environment and they're in the office every single day. They don't have any light, any windows, and they keep showing up to meetings in a boardroom. What would you recommend that they do differently?
Go for a walk. And I always hear, I live in Minnesota. It's so cold. I get it. Yeah. Maybe it won't be a long walk, but there's no such thing as bad weather. It's just bad clothing. And I think we can get outside and, these bigger companies, you can walk the halls, you don't have to be outside. It's just about doing something different and asking a better question. And, we're all so busy. Combine it with something you love or you like to do. Why not, try to connect with somebody outside of work? I don't know. There's a lot of different ways, but it's asking better questions, moving, and trying to get into a different environment where you're not just sitting straight across from somebody.
Yes, I agree. Moving is key. And so I just spoke last week to a big group of information technology leaders, and they all work from home. So the only thing that they could come up with to get moving is, and they're doing Zoom after Zoom after Zoom. And I introduced you in my presentation, Bart Foster, Business Outside, Connection Walks. And I said, I want you to I said, that was just one example. I gave them other examples of power hours. A lot of my hospital leaders who are CEOs of hospitals and high level leaders, every day from 1 until 2, they have a power hour where they're out rounding around the hospital, because you really lose connection with the frontline staff and your patients if you stay in your office all day. So they do rounding. So I gave them some different examples of how to think differently about how they're connecting. As you and I have spoken in the past, I'm calling it your connection cadence. Right? Figure out who do you need to connect with to be successful in your job at work, and then tweak the cadence. Does it have to be, right, a Zoom call? Does it have to be in a corporate boardroom? So the one thing that they all came up with, there are about 70 leaders, and we did breakout groups. And then the best idea from each breakout group, and I'd say 90% said they're going to start doing connection walks a la Bart Foster with their earbuds in, and they're going to do it either outside or on their treadmill. And then one group, which I thought was really great, they had an idea of a Wellness Wednesday meeting that they all meet anyhow on a Wednesday. And instead of saying you have to walk, they're going to announce to the group of what they're doing on their call with their earbuds that's good for them. And one of them said, I might need to lie down. I get migraines and I might need to just admit that I need to lie down. Another one said, I need to weed my garden. And I'm going to tell everybody that I'm on the call and I'm with them and I'm weeding my garden. I said, I just love that you're still able to be productive, and it's wellness, what you can do to think, to have a little bit more clarity in mental health. So thank you for that. Okay. So when you talk in your book about kind of your North Star, but you have what do you call it? You have a terminology for it.
Do you mean your personal values or your zone of genius?
Your zone of genius. Beautiful. Yes. Can you tell the listeners about why your zone of genius is so important when it comes to connection?
Yeah. And, Gay Hendricks coined the term, this zone of genius. And it's essentially, there's things we love, there's things we hate, and there's things we're terrible at, and there's things we're great at. That top right quadrant, things you love and you're great at, that's your zone of genius. And often, we're only in our zone of genius 30% of the time, because we're in this job and, we're good at some of it. We're great at other parts. We're not that good. But it's just, that's because we're the VP of marketing. That's what we're expected to do. We're expected to be great at PowerPoint because we're VP of marketing. Well, the reality is most people are not in their zone of genius all the time, but could we shift things? So I call it job crafting. Is there an opportunity to craft our job so that we're in our zone of genius? Because if we can get in our zone of genius more often, we're going to be happier, healthier, more productive. And something recently, and I think I wrote about in the book, is I think we have a moral responsibility as a society that if it's not in our zone of genius, it's in someone else's. So let's bring that person or get out of the way here, recraft that job, because that's where the magic happens. And,
I couldn't agree with you more.
Example, like I'm actually pretty good at managing a team. I just hate it. I'm terrible at finance and I hate it. But I love leading with passion, enthusiasm, turning a vision into reality, making shit happen.
Yes. So think about performance appraisals in corporate America. In the past and probably in the present, so much time is spent on what you're not doing well. And here's what you need to get better at what you're not doing well. And the Gallup research has shown that we will get so much more return on our investment if we put people in the right roles where they get to soar with their strengths rather than continuing to focus on what they're not doing well. Just put them in a place where they get to soar, their zone of genius. I absolutely love that. Yes, thank you. So to all of our listeners, what Bart and I are trying to do is to help you just think differently about how you're connecting. Are you connecting with the right people? Can you connect in a way that goes deeper? Can you ask better questions? Can you connect shoulder to shoulder? Can you move? We really want you to get out and move so that you're not on Zooms. We want you to be physically healthy, mentally healthy. We want you to be productive when you're at work. And we both believe that now's the time to rethink everything. If not now, then when? I mean, we're inventing and reinventing the way that we live and the way that we work at this point. So, Bart, can you leave our listeners with just things that they can go back with tomorrow?
I'm going to leave them with a challenge, actually.
Okay.
Can I do that?
Please.
So, and this is a connection secret that you'll learn, and which is sound and motion and emotion creates a connection. Often we're moving so fast that we don't have the time. We don't take the time, right? Gratitude is also, it's an emotion, and gratitude is something that most of us don't do enough. None of us got to where we are alone. There's all people in our lives. Could be a spouse, it could be our loved ones, it could be a mentor. We all have a lot of people in our life that we're grateful for. Here's the challenge. Pick one person that you're grateful for. In the next 24 hours, I want you to take out your phone. Preferably you're outside when you do this. And I want you to record a short selfie video for that person. It could be anybody in your life. And if you want to sit on a rock and record 5 of them, great. And if you want to say, hey, I heard this thing on this podcast and the guy's making me do it, fine. But I want you to record at least one. It's 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and then hit send. And tell the person why you're grateful, what you learned, all of it. And what happens is it creates this gratitude loop. And Michelle, I've done this. We're actually on this app, Marco Polo. The CEO reached out to me recently because they're launching a business version of Marco Polo. Like, how cool. It's a way to make these meaningful connections. So the challenge then is go send that video. How's that?
Oh, that's beautiful, Bart. Bart Foster, everybody, give it up. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your zone of genius, sharing your gifts with us, and challenging us. Thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in to the Seismic Shift podcast. See you next time. Thank you for joining us on the Seismic Shift. And before you go, can I ask one favor of you? Do you mind sharing today's episode with a leader you know? The power of this conversation is found in your using it and sharing it to create real connection in your life. Lastly, I'd like to thank Loyola University New Orleans and the Terra Firma audio team for helping bring this content to life.